Welcome everyone to our Spring 2022 series of OTF Connects webinars entitled Supporting Teacher Efficacy and Student Engagement. My name is Peter Beans and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's session with Leanne Oliver and Trish Mecker entitled Strategies for Student Ownership of Learning, Part 2 of 2. Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are gathered in the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples, and we further recognize our duty to support the achievement of the calls to actions stemming from the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Let's welcome, for the second time, Leanne and Trish. Leanne currently serves as a classroom math teacher and curriculum chair of mathematics at All Saints Catholic Secondary School in the Durham Catholic District School Board. As a co-creator of the Ultimate Potential Math program, Leanne has a growth mindset and believes that with the proper support, each and every student can achieve their ultimate potential. Leanne's past participation in several provincial TLLP and international NORCAN learning projects has taught her the critical value of teacher collaboration and deprivatized classroom environments. Leanne's most recent learning has focused on developing and implementing classroom practices that address and honor the role of assessment in supporting growth mindset and student ownership of learning. Leanne has shared her learning at various provincial and international conferences. Trish Mecker is an experienced classroom teacher currently working at All Saints Catholic Secondary School in the Durham Catholic District School Board. Trish has served as a lead and participant in several TLLP projects, as well as NORCAN, an international project that brought together educators from Ontario, Alberta, and Norway in a quest to improve the educational experience of students in the math classroom. As an ultimate potential math teacher, Trish understands the value of a growth mindset and targeted planning and supporting and helping students to overcome obstacles to learning. Trish's most recent learning has centered on building assessment practices that honor mistakes and nurture the growth mindset of her students. Trish is also a strong believer in the impact of deprivatized classrooms and teacher course teams on collective teacher efficacy in a school community. Trish has shared her learning at various provincial and international conferences. So now let's turn it over to Leanne and Trish. Welcome.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. We're really happy to be here today. Trish is you're able to share your screen, Trish.
I've just turned off the sound so we won't be bothered when people come in.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Here we go.
Awesome.
Everyone, I'm Trish Mecker.
And I'm Leanne Oliver. Nice to see you all. I'm not sure how many people are repeat participants. I wonder if we can get some feedback about that, because I think that might be something that would be helpful for us to know. I wonder, are the like the thumbs up and stuff, are they activated for us to be, are the reactions possible?
Yep.
So if you feel comfortable giving us a thumbs up, if this is part 2 for you, or if you've participated in part 1, because this is a two-part session, but we can work with whatever happens, right, yeah. Trish?
Exactly. We want to address whatever you would like, right? So really want to interact with you today.
Absolutely. So I think Peter mentioned earlier about in terms of the chat, we're also really comfortable with you unmuting yourself and us just kind of having conversations and questions as we're going. I think given the small, almost class-like nature of our time together today, that's probably the most impactful way for us to move through and learn together.
Yeah. So we thought we would start. Oh gosh, there we go. We thought we would start just with a recap of some of the things that we talked about in our first session. And really what we did was we went through our story of where we got to where we are right now. And that was through our learnings from implementing a UP math program into, first of all, our schools, and then it was implemented board-wide. right? And we looked at some of the classroom practices that were highly impactful in terms of increasing student engagement. And we noticed that really some of those practices were dealing with the emotional side of learning, and some of those practices were dealing with the cognitive side of learning. And it wasn't until we really looked at our assessment and evaluation practices that we noticed that if we wanted to give students ownership of their learning and respect growth mindset, that it all came down to our assessment and evaluation practices.
And I think the other part of that as well is that without those changes to our assessment and evaluation practices, a lot of the other work that we did surrounding the emotional and cognitive parts really became less and less effective. And that was such a critical piece that if we didn't actually change that, we weren't making the same sort of impact as when we did.
Mhm. Mhm. So in our last session, we ended off with a poll that asked you, what would you like to learn more about? And we thought we'd share those results with you. You can see them on the screen there, right? So in our last session, we talked about learning maps. It seems like learning maps and our reassessment policies were the highest in terms of what you would like to learn more about, along with our criteria-based assessment. And actually gradeless was a little bit there, right? But
And
sorry, go ahead.
I just think that's interesting as well, is because when we looked at these, I think that those things that the participants chose that they wanted to learn more about were actually those practices that had the greatest impact if we're looking to measure impact.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's why we thought in this session today, we would focus on some of those assessment practices, and the approach that we thought we would do was go over an assessment overview that we normally go through with students in the first week of school. We can show you that. And it will address some of those things that you had put into your request for this session.
And once again, as we're going through, please interrupt us, ask questions, and all that jazz.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we really want to answer your questions. There's just a few of us here today, right? So whatever you want to focus on, please, you can use the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask. So this is exactly the assessment overview, right? And we have provided it in the Google Drive that we shared with the link with last time. And we can share that link again later on in the session today, right? So we really talk to the students about assessment being for learning, and they don't understand what that means, right? But we do show them the fundamental principle of assessment from growing success, because they do actually understand when we say that the primary purpose of anything we assess and evaluate is to improve your learning, right? We say that to the students, that any assessment practices that we use in this course, their purpose is to improve their learning.
I think this is really critical as well, that the students understand that this is a policy document in Ontario, but also it's changing the perception of what assessment and evaluation really is like. And I think that we've moved a good direction with this, but I do think back, Trish, to even 10 years ago, I really do believe that students did not see assessment for learning. I think they saw it as a way that the teacher almost had control of the situation, and that it was a measure of where they lacked or whether they were capable of achieving. So the entire mindset surrounding why we're doing assessment and evaluation really needed to shift significantly if we really wanted our students to own their learning. So that's why we really try to be transparent in showing the students that this is not just something that Miss Mecca or Miss Oliver does in their class. This is something that is really inherent to the entire education process now in their secondary school, and I guess elementary career as well.
So in terms of our presentation today, it was about student engagement and how that led to ownership of learning. We tell the students right off the bat in the course that they are in charge, just like Leanne was saying there, right? We, as the teacher, are not here and controlling all the marks, and it's not transactional at all. They are in charge of their learning, and the assessment practices that we've set up in the course are designed for them to own their learning and take charge of what they're doing.
I think anecdotally as well, we've come to see through experience with implementing these practices that the engagement is markedly increased by making this change. When we did all of those other emotional and cognitive changes, there was, a slight uptick, but this was really the ticket, I think, that caused students to really understand that it was for them. And if they feel like they have some essence of control over it, the engagement was just so much more. I don't know, Trish, if you agree with that or not, but that has been my experience.
I agree that, like, in my previous, before we implemented these practices, right, the students thought that they wrote an assessment and that's the end of it, right? And it wasn't about learning at all. It was, even sometimes right now, when we deal with parents, it's more like, I'll hand you in this assignment and you will give me these marks, right? So we've really tried to take all of that away and just focus on the students as the learners and how can they improve in their learning.
So in terms of the role of the teacher, that's something that we really had to transform as well. It's not a matter of taking control from the teacher, but I think it is perceived control, giving the classroom and the ownership to the students. So instead of being the only one in the room that supposedly knows what's happening or has expertise, the role of the teacher becomes that of a supporter or a coach, helping a student identify areas where they still need to grow. And so we really needed to make sure that we were creating some practices that were manageable, where we could have a level of transparency so that both the teacher and the student were able to easily identify next steps. So everything that we're doing in terms of trying to change practices is always to make some new structure or support that the students can use to grow. And so that's kind of, as we're always growing, because we're always trying to improve and we're always learning new things, that if it doesn't kind of meet that criteria, that's kind of like our idea, well, maybe we should reconsider this. Is this really kind of getting to the end that is our overarching goal? Because if it's not, then it might be leading us a bit off course.
Yeah. So one of the options there was to learn more about criteria-based assessment, right? So one of the big impactful changes that we did make with our assessment practices is that every assessment and evaluation throughout the entire course is tied to a learning goal for the course. So that, and again, this slide right here, we show our students. So they might not have heard that terminology, learning goal before, but what we talked about in our last session is that we took the curriculum. We start with the curriculum in any new course that we implement, right? And we took the curriculum expectations and we put them into student-friendly language so students can understand exactly what it is that they're going to be learning in the course, right? So as opposed to before, and we'll show you our learning map, which we talked about before, as opposed to before, all our learning might have been tied to CUTICA, knowledge, understanding, application, etc., right? We were still getting that question, well, how can I improve my mark? And we're two things with that, right? We're not talking about anymore, how can I improve my mark? We're trying to improve our learning, right? And we don't get that question because they actually get that information through our assessment practices. If it's tied to the learning goal, then they know what they still need to work on to improve their learning.
And the other change, I think, Trish, that it's important to mention is that there was a great level of transparency in terms of what they're going to be asked to show competency of. So these learning goals, and as Trish said, we're going to share our learning map with you for one or two of the courses. We actually post these on the wall. So that the students know coming in, this is what we're going to learn in our course. These are our learning goals. So once again, there's that transparency. This is not something that I, as your teacher, have, cooked up and decided that you're going to need to show me. These are the parameters. This is the goalpost that's not going to move throughout our course. You're going to be able to show us competency of that, work to improve, and then as a result of your improved learning, the grades will follow. But as Trish said, the learning is always where we try to keep our eye.
Any questions so far? Or please, feel free to interrupt or put something in the chat or.
Just checking the chat. Yeah, feel free, guys. Okay, so we'll move through a little bit more, I guess, then, Trish.
Do you ever get
Yeah.
the students to help create the learning goals?
We used to, I think a little while ago, right, Trish? We did get them to help us co-construct those learning goals. And we moved away from that because I guess our new thinking was that this is the curriculum and this is the thing that does not change. We did not want them at that point. I don't know if I should say we. I was concerned with them. I was concerned with them thinking that this was something that would change, that we could change it, that it was something that I had a power to change. I wanted them to see that that was something that was separate, assigned by the ministry or as the curriculum document, and that my job was just almost was as their coach to help them get there.
Interesting. I used to do it all the time, actually. Especially with my grade 12s. So I would get them to look at the overall expectations and then parse them and get them. And then they would start asking questions. What does this mean? What does this mean?
Yeah.
But then in the end, they understood the overall expectations. So they knew exactly where the course was going.
Yeah.
And then we turned all the overall expectations into learning goals.
Yeah.
And now my situation was that, I had split classes. So the grade 12s had to work largely independently. But now they knew exactly where they were going right from day one, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So it worked well.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think we do that in UP and the Ultimate Potential Math course because the learning goals actually change depending upon who is present in the room and what the needs are. But that is something interesting. We have had quite a bit of discussion in our department because we are moving to streamline, and we're finding that this idea of tying all of our assessment and evaluation to specific learning goals instead of the CUDICA is really the one big practice that's the game changer. And there's a lot of discussion about how specific these learning goals should be. And so, the overall learning goals or the specific learning goals tied to the overall expectations or strands. And we have some people who are, I think, moving towards that, Trish, what Peter is talking about. So I agree. I think there's many ways to do it. And I think sometimes we're all different.
Yeah. So at this point in time, we would talk to the students about the two really types of assessment, formative assessment and summative assessment. And as we know from Growing Success, we talk about assessment as you're learning, right? Versus as assessment of learning. So we talk about whenever we do a formative assessment, that there wouldn't be any grade assigned to that. And we really focus on the feedback, right? We did a lot of research with gradeless. When we first started looking into assessment and evaluation, we were looking to do a gradeless classroom. And we could talk about that more, but really, as soon as you put a grade on a formative assessment or a summative assessment, that's the first thing the students look at, and sometimes the only thing the students look at, right? So we found that those needed to come totally off of that. They get feedback only and an indication of where they are on a continuum of learning. So these are just different types of assessment as learning that we use in our classrooms. We'll show you a few examples of those, keeping in mind we are in a math classroom, but a lot of these can be used in any classroom. So one of those was a checkpoint. And really, for us, another, I don't know if we should talk about that too, Leanne, is that there's a lot of language associated with assessment and evaluation that we kind of wanted to get away from.
Mhm.
So really, this is a quiz, right? We got away from using quiz tests, and we started calling our quizzes checkpoints, right? And at first we had to say that to them. This is right. This is like, we're going to have a quiz, but really they understand this terminology of a checkpoint, right? We're on our learning journey. We need to check in right now to see where we're learning or where we are in our learning. And in order to improve our learning, we need to probably get some feedback on that, right? So you can see in this checkpoint here that this is a grade 11 math course. The learning goal is at the top. You can see this is our continuum of learning. I don't know if I have a cursor. Do I have a cursor? Anyway, I guess not. Beside the learning goal is our continuum of learning. And we've done a lot of research on that too, and a lot of just playing around with it. It was a 4-point continuum. We've now changed it to 3 points and really changed the language there to be very simple for students to do self-assessment. And then you'll notice there's no mark on there. And then on the right-hand side, there is a specific section of this checkpoint that is designed just for feedback, for the teacher to give feedback to the students.
I think the interesting part of this is that in making this change, students are much more eager to have more feedback. They don't feel the stress and pressure. Students, because we are math teachers, there was a little bit of, well, there was quite a bit of anxiety surrounding math for some of our students. And so that is something that we were always cognizant of and wanting to try to alleviate. And one of the added benefits of this is once the students realized that this was really for their growth, that pressure came off. And it went from students being like, oh no, we have a quiz, to can we please have another checkpoint so that we can get some more feedback? And clearly, if they're asking that, then they're using it for growth. It's gotten to the point where it's almost unmanageable for the teacher. So we've had to actually look at other options, with peer assessment and just coaching our students with how to provide feedback to one another, moderate it by the teacher, so that they could continue to get the amount of feedback that they really want. So we feel like that's a really good learning that the students are making, that they're understanding that if I get feedback, I can use it to grow. And of course, that's what we want in terms of a growth mindset. If they act on that feedback, then that's exactly what learning is, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because even actually, like today, I gave my grade 11s a checkpoint, and it's happened before also that if students are absent, if they're absent, they don't want to, like, they miss the quiz or whatever, that doesn't really matter to them, but they're like, can I still do it? Because I need that feedback, right? And there's been a number of times it's like, well, why didn't you give us a checkpoint on inverses? And I'm like, sometimes it's just a matter of, it takes a lot of time to give that feedback and trying to fit it into our own schedules, right?
I had similar situations with my grade 9s, and one of the students who was away came back, and then I offered for them to do the checkpoint, and a student that was near saying, here, I'm done mine. And the student said, well, what's the point of me getting feedback on what you've done? I need feedback on what I think. And I thought, wow, I felt like angels were singing,
Yeah.
that, oh my goodness, they get it. It's really about helping them to grow. So I really like this aspect. And Trish did mention that we started with a 4-point scale. We went to a 3-point scale. Speaking with one of the researchers that do this kind of work, even suggested that a 2-point scale might be sufficient.
Yeah.
So it's constantly changing and evolving.
Yeah. And speaking about our 3-point scale there, right? The students need to really understand, even today when we did that, we did a checkpoint. I actually had the students give each other feedback because I knew I wouldn't have time to give them take that in and give them feedback in a timely manner. And they asked me, well, should we circle where we think they are? And I said, yeah, for sure, circle, right? So this is something we have up in our classrooms in terms of explaining what we mean by getting there or got it, right? So I think it could be applied to any classroom, not just a math classroom, right? Feedback there on that?
I do. And we have one teacher in our department who has taken these colors and actually used them in her Excel spreadsheet as she makes observations and has conversations and checkpoints with her students, and really basically color codes it. So looking at it with just a very quick glance can see if there's a lot of green, where the red is, where the yellow is, and so forth. It's really, really helpful. We also sometimes do journals with our students, and Trish and I actually went online and bought some stamps that were like the little red, yellow, and green faces. And that's a super quick way for us to provide feedback to students after we've read that.
If you look at the continuum, you can see the got it phase is got more expectations there. It's almost like it's got 2 levels. So that is from our 4-level continuum from before. We used to have 4 levels that were beginning, developing, refining, and then mastery, right? But some of the students, like, I think these titles, not yet getting there, got it, are very intuitive for them. And in that got it, we have people that are refining, and then we are people that are mastering. So those last expectations there, I can explain in my own words, right? That's really the mastery, the phase of learning. We also give them this continuum because we can tell them you're in this stage, but what's the next step then if you are in this stage? So if you're in the getting there stage, what can you do next, right? Besides following the feedback that we give on a checkpoint, right? What are some of the things that they could do to move along the continuum of learning? Any questions with the continuum?
I was just thinking both Google Sheets and Excel, they have color maps that you can put in for the formatting of the cells. So if you put in like a number, like 123 or 012 or something like that, and then format those cells with the color map, it would take care of the colors automatically. It'd be very simple to do.
I would like to learn that.
I would too. And I think that would be very, very helpful as we're circulating around the room, doing our observations, because that's one of the things that teachers find so challenging. We know we want to use the products, the conversations, and the observations, but how do we make the records of our observations and conversations like so quickly when you've got 31 students in that room, right? So being able to just put the color in would be really ideal, I think.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Well, just put in like a numeric grade and then let the spreadsheet take care of the colors for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure personally if I would just stick to the 3. Like if I were going around, I would say, if you're fully not yet, you're a 1. That's just what I'm thinking. Getting there, you're a 3. Got it, you're a 5. That way there might be some students that, they don't want to say not yet, but they're not quite getting there, right? So that gives them intermediate points.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that reminds me of like Remember we were talking about Norway's system too, like a 1 to
Yeah.
6, right?
What does Norway
Yeah.
do?
A 6-level system.
Uh-huh.
How we have 4 levels, they have a 6-level system. And
Oh,
it's, yeah, it's very interesting because these European countries, a lot of them have more levels, like Peter's suggesting. And Peter Liljedahl, who is the Simon Fraser University professor who has the thinking classroom research, he's moving in the other direction. So it would be really interesting to delve a little bit deeper and truly understand the advantages and disadvantages of each. I think the reason why we started with the 4 level is just because of preconceived notions of having 4 levels, you know, level 1, 2, 3, 4. It's where our brain was fixed. But
Yeah,
there's not to say that there's a right, that's right.
I know. Yeah. So now we thought we'd show you a few other examples. I know that with one of the groups from the last session, the conversation was, how do we manage the formative assessment in a timely way? So we just mentioned the checkpoints, which are a form of formative assessment, but they are very often timely, or sorry, yeah, timely to give back, right? You have to, it takes a lot of time to do that, right? So I don't know, some of you might be aware of all of these, but we do use the mini whiteboards in our classroom, I would say on a daily basis for formative assessment. Really, like often I will say, take out your mini whiteboard, and we call it just show me, right? And it can come in various forms in terms of the mathematics. This again is for my grade 11s. I tell them the characteristics of a parabola. They quickly on the whiteboard show me what's the equation, right? Sometimes they hold it up. We even used this when the kids were online, right? We asked them last year, right, to please have a mini whiteboard. I'm going to give you a question. You just hold it up to your camera, and I can see right then who is on the right track, or who is getting there, who's got it, who's not yet there.
To me, Trish, this is one of the biggest changes in teaching practice in the last 10 years, having access to these. Does anybody else use the mini whiteboards by any chance? Let me just see, because maybe they know all about them already. I'm not sure. But I felt like that's one of the biggest changes. And I think that there are so many advantages to this. Basically, you can go to Scholastic and you can buy a classroom set of 30, some erasable markers. So Jennifer was saying she does too. I think part of the reason why they're so effective is because they are erasable with the dry erase. I think that students are less hesitant to engage and take some risks with their thinking, simply because they can erase it quickly and they don't feel like it's carved in stone. I feel like this is the biggest, most effective way for me to provide descriptive feedback, because it is immediate. I also think that students are able to write what they think, get feedback, change it on the fly, and really make sure that they're on the right track. I think it's 100% engagement, because the students can either hold it up, that I could see it at the front, but they can also, if they're less certain, have it on their desks, and I can walk around quietly and give some quiet sort of feedback. I can point out some place where their thinking might be flawed so that they can self-correct. I can't really overestimate or overshare how much this has changed the learning in my classroom. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at these types of options.
I agree. And it's we all have those students in our classes that are quiet, and they won't put their hand up during a lesson. And this is their way of getting that feedback, even though they're not, right? It's safe for them, right? Not only in not having to share it with the whole class, but like Leanne said, it's non-permanent, right? They erase it if it's correct.
For sure. And then with the feedback that you're getting, it often drives the direction of learning.
Yes.
Right? So we can see where they're having making mistakes and we see it in real time, we address it, we change our direction on the fly. Okay, we need to practice some over those, or we really don't understand this other concept. I feel like I can get more done with the mini whiteboards than I can sometimes in a whole lesson. Of us just of me, sharing them, even of me directing at the whiteboards around the class and the students working in groups. I think this has its unique spot because I feel like the feedback is student specific.
Yeah.
We had a question that was sent to me privately, so I'm just going to pop it in the chat.
Perfect.
I'd like to have a look at it.
How do you encourage the student who asks, is this for marks? And when they figure out the checkpoint is not for marks, they decide not to write it. Good point. I know that I have gotten that from the beginning about, is this for marks? And even because we do a lot of work at the whiteboards using a thinking classroom approach, students who feel like, oh, well, why would I bother participating? Why would I bother trying to offer my thinking? I basically tell them everything is for marks. Because at the end, we triangulate our data. So I will be looking for and making notes on conversations, observations, and I am allowed to use my professional judgment at the end in order to make sure that the grade that they get at the end represents the truth of what they know. So they're really losing an opportunity to show me what they know by choosing not to engage with that. And Trish, what do you have to say to that?
I was going to say that I rarely get a student that does not participate in that. They show what even if I've had some students say, I don't know how to do this, right? And I said, well, show me what you're thinking, right? And because it's not for marks, they do show me what they're thinking, and then I can guide them, right? So they actually like that it's not for marks because they can get that feedback as to how to get on the right track there.
I understand the question though, because I do feel like at the beginning, I do get that question a lot. And then once they start to see the value of the feedback and it not being for marks, that's when they really start to use it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah.
I would also point out, it's for them, it's for their benefit.
Yeah.
Because it's an opportunity to get feedback.
Yeah.
So it's their loss, really, if they don't participate.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But like I said, I really find that I rarely get students that say, yeah, I can't write this, right? And just don't do it.
Yeah, I don't think I have either, but like you said, there's some that just really don't know, and it's the same sort of idea. So what does that tell us then? What do we learn from that? Well, what's been happening? And those are great conversations that kind of evolve from that. And of course, that's where those conferences come into play, right? Making the time for those conversations when that situation arises.
On the same lines of the show me, I don't know if anyone has used Plickers in their classroom. So let us know if you have or if you haven't. Basically, it's a set of cards that are assigned to each student, right? And it's kind of like the clickers. I forget what those were, right?
Yeah.
Paper?
Years ago, it was a clicker, I think it called.
Yeah.
Yep, clickers.
Yeah. So we often use this also, especially if we have to, like, for instance, the example there, we have to give them a graph and, right, how do they show us that? We want them to state the domain of the relation. And I know this isn't about math, but all they do is they hold up their card and you can see that the teacher scans it with their phone. And when you scan it with your phone, it will, above the student, it will just put green if it's correct or red if it's not correct. So we can give the students, again, we just walk around the classroom, we can give them that immediate feedback as to whether they understand it, whether they got the question right, or whether they have some more work to do with that. a very low tech, inexpensive way to have the students participate. And they actually really like the Plickers, don't they, Leanne?
They really like them. They really, and I think as for me as a teacher, that this is a really cool tool. Because when I see the greens or the reds, in addition to telling them, I get to know where we need to spend a little bit more time and where we need to grow. You'll see in the top left picture that we have on the screen there, they look like QR codes.
Yeah.
And if you zoom in on them, you see that each of the 4 sides of the QR code represent a letter A, B, C, or D. So they can hold up the letter, and that is how the Plickers app decides what they've chosen. So when they're holding up their QR code, the other students in the class really can't see what they are saying the answer is. So there's that anonymity in terms of whether they're thinking their classmates are going to think they don't know because their answer is different than theirs. So I really like that part, because it reduces the hesitancy of students to actually participate. And yeah, they really like it. And remember the clickers from the, was it the 2000s, the early 2000s, the amount of work it took to set that up. These are super, super easy. You go to the Plickers website, free teacher account. You can print the cards directly from the website and pretty much give them out to your kids and be ready to go. Enter your questions. So really, like Trish said, it uses technology, but it's really easy to use and it's very cost effective. And if you've got a smartphone, you can link it to your phone and just kind of pull it out and have a look at what your students are thinking.
And it gives you that data afterwards also, after you've run a set of questions, right? Afterwards, you can go look and say, okay, these students got this question wrong. Maybe I need to do some small group instruction with this group, right? Or pair them with students that do understand it, right? So it gives you a record of that also. Anyone else used Plickers before?
So how many pieces of paper does each student have to select from?
Oh, they have one, and they just rotate it. So that card, depending on how they hold it up, answers A, B, or C. So they have just one piece of paper, one card.
Oh, I see.
And what we have done in our classroom most recently, especially with COVID, and we were worried when we first came back about cross-contamination, which I know it's maybe not a thing anymore, is we had baggies on the side of each student's desk, and they would have their own Plicker card that they would use each time. So basically from their baggie on the side of their desk, they could get out their mini whiteboard, they could get out their marker, they get out their Plicker card. Everything they need for the class is basically inside that baggie that's tied to them. So they have ownership of that throughout. Because you do want the student to have a specific Plicker card if you want the data to be recorded as belonging to that student.
Interesting.
So those were all of our strategies for formative assessment. And then we have also changed our terminology for our summative assessment from being a test to a comprehensive cycle assessment, right? So we actually don't talk about tests. That comes at the end of the cycle, and that is when we do report some grades, but the grades are reported for each learning goal, right? By doing that, we allow students to identify which learning goals they are strong with and which they need to target for further learning. So what we have here is a sample of the last page on a comprehensive assessment where the grades would be recorded. So you can see that they're all tied to a learning goal, right? So the learning goals are listed there, and for each different learning goal, they would get a grade. We call that an at this moment grade, an ATM grade. And did you want to add? Yeah.
The interesting part, I think, is that even though this last page looks maybe a little bit different than what you might be used to seeing. The test really looks like a math test.
Yeah.
It has questions on it. Now, we don't have out of marks or anything like that on it because we really don't want to focus on marks. But of course, we need to produce a grade at the end of the course. So we really have our hands tied there. And so we needed to introduce grades at some point. So apart from the tests being regular, our regular math test, we just record the final data this way. So prior to making this change, we would have recorded our data in 4 categories: in knowledge, understanding, application, thinking, and communication. And that's how we would have recorded it in our grade books. But I think Trish has mentioned already, by telling them you didn't do well in the application section in this particular test really doesn't give them a direction to grow. By providing it this way, they know exactly what concept they are struggling with and exactly where they need to grow. And like Trish mentioned about the ATMs, that's another purposeful change in vocabulary, because we want them to understand that we're always improving, always learning. We didn't want to call it a grade because for them, grades were too final, that, oh, great, I only got that mark. We want them to fully understand that there is still and always room for improvement until the end of the course. And if they are able to improve their competency with a particular goal, that will be eventually reflected in the grade that is used to describe their abilities.
So this is where we record our grades afterwards on the learning map. And we talked about this the last time. I know that one of the requests that we received after our first session was, can you give us an example of what this looks like? Right. So we showed this before, but I think if we go ahead, can I go ahead to the learning?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I think this is a big thing for us in terms of what our grade book looks like, right? What my binder looks like. Actually, you can do it in a OneNote notebook, or I'm interested to look at these spreadsheets too, right? But we have really the learning goals on the left. We have formative assessment in the middle where the colors are. And then we have on the right, they're at this moment grades. So you can see how this is just one example, and you can set up your own codes or systems or whatever it may be, right? But some of the formative assessments are right there in the middle. You can do a journal, a checkpoint, observation, conversation, whatever fits in to your teaching style, right? You can put right there. And then on the right-hand side, those grades came right from their comprehensive assessment. And you can see that some of those grades have been crossed out. If you look for learning goal L2, this student initially on their comprehensive assessment was at a 50% in terms of understanding the concept, right? Then based on a conversation that I had with the student, they showed that they really did understand it. So their grade should reflect their current knowledge, right? So that grade is crossed off and it is replaced with their current understanding. The same thing happens with learning goal L4, and those codes, I know some people in the last session were asking where those codes come from. Those are just make it easier for us to refer to the learning goal. So L4, again, originally a 50%. For me, MTM, or not just me, for Leanne and I, right? We use MTM as an acronym for moving towards mastery, which is really the goal of learning, right? Especially in a subject like mathematics where it builds, we want our students to master the concepts before they move on to the next grade. So they're fully prepared for that grade, right? So MTM is a reassessment that we've allowed our students to do after they've met certain criteria to show us that they actually have improved their learning.
Something I think might be pertinent to mention here, Trish, is that in implementing this type of reassessment, and I know we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail, in terms of implementing this type of idea, I have noticed that students are better at
Yep.
the end of the course. So by students taking the initiative with support to go back and improve their knowledge and understanding, the fact that we are allowing that, supporting that happening throughout the course, instead of just saying, oh, at the end of the course, you'll get another chance on the culminating task or the final exam to show me you know now. First of all, that never happened a lot, simply because by that time it was so long ago and too many things to pull together. But by allowing these marks to change in real time as this new learning happened was very motivating for students. And as a result, I found that in subsequent cycles of the course, they actually improved and improved and improved, because no longer were they going forward with a fraction of what they were supposed to take from the previous concept. So now they have fewer gaps in their learning because they have remediated right when it was happening. And I really found that, but when I didn't do this, students were just like, okay, I'm going to move forward. Let me see now. Thank goodness that's over. Phew. But really, it never was over, right? Because we were building. So I really believe that them seeing as well the crossing out and the replacement of the mark, so keeping that transparency, was really motivating in terms of getting them to continue to try to improve their learning throughout the course as we went. So we talk about ownership of learning. This to me is one of those big game changers in terms of helping that to happen.
And the students have a copy of this learning map in their binder also, so they can record, they can do self-assessments, right? We can say, okay, yesterday we did this learning goal. What's a quick self-assessment? Where are you? And they can record it right on their learning map, right? So we call it a learning map because it directs their learning, right? It shows them the directions of where they need to go next.
Any questions about that before we move forward? Because I know that was a big series of questions that we did get some emails and stuff on the last time too.
Feel free to unmute anyone.
For sure. Okay, I guess we can.
Okay.
Okay. All right, the reassessment criteria. One of the challenges we get sometimes from other teachers in terms of conversations is, if students can just do reassessments, how are we really helping them to be responsible learners? How are we ensuring that they're giving their best? What we have found to work well is that in order for a student to be eligible to reassess, they must have completed all the homework and tasks for the cycle by the day of the test. We find this to be very motivating. In fact, my students, my grade 9s, have a test tomorrow, and today during class, as we're working through the review and the showcase, I have tons of students coming up and saying, can I show you evidence that I have done this homework? Because they understand that by doing the work ahead of time, they are going to preserve a possibility of reassessment. I know from the teacher perspective that when they've done their practice, they probably will need a reassessment much fewer times than the students who haven't done it. So it's kind of like, for me, it is the best of both worlds. So they realized that that's the case. And that was a big change, I think, this year or the last year. Before that, we really wanted to ensure that students had ownership. And so we didn't have such stringent criteria in place. It had to be done before they could reassess, but we realized that that wasn't working, because students would not do the homework, would write the assessment, and then say, well, if I don't do well, then I'll go back and do my homework, and then I'll be eligible to reassess. But they were getting way too behind because the course is moving on. And also, it really wasn't teaching them what we wanted to teach them, right? We wanted to teach them to be responsible students using learning skills that we know are going to be impactful for them as they move through high school and even to post-secondary, college, university, even the workforce. So that was a huge change for us. So they need to have their homework done by the day of the test. they need to have corrected the original assessment, because the whole point of assessment and evaluation, even the comprehensive assessment, is to improve learning. So if they actually haven't gone back and made corrections, they haven't used that to improve their learning. The additional piece is that we created short tasks that were really kind of additional questions or little tasks, kind of like additional little bits of homework for the specific learning goals that they needed to complete and hand into us or show us evidence of before they were eligible to reassess. So what this says is that reassessment is not a walk in the park, okay, because learning and improving and is sometimes something that takes a bit of work. They needed to complete their homework, make sure they correct their test, but there were some additional practice questions that they need to do and show that they're able to do before they can earn the right to reassess. And what we tell our students is that for us to just retest you and you to have the same sort of result, I'm wasting your time and you're wasting my time. And it's also not great for your mindset to just have the same result again and again. So when you have shown me that you have improved learning, and that happens via these additional, what we call moving toward mastery questions, then I feel like you're ready to reassess, because we want your reassessment mark to be better. We want it to be fruitful for you this entire process.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing, right? They need to provide evidence to us that they have an improved knowledge of the learning goal that they're working on before reassessment can take place.
And there is a comment here, no all goods.
No, that was a question. You had
Oh,
asked earlier how they were doing, and she said,
okay.
"No, all good."
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Jennifer, for your feedback. My apologies. Okay.
That's why commas are so important.
True, true. Do you want me to speak to this one, Trish, or do you want to?
Sure.
Okay. The other issue that we came upon, and this really, my experience with this was really put to the test when I had grade 12 university students who are after that scholarship, which is fantastic, and are after the 100%. And so they continually wanted to reassess again and again and again for specific learning goals. And what we understood, or what we came to understand, I think, is that if we want it to be about learning, then we have to take some of that focus away from marks. And we found that one of the ways to do that was to assess or grade our reassessments via levels instead of using numerical grades. So on their comprehensive assessment, when they are selecting the tool that they need to use, when they're integrating each of the learning goals perhaps with other learning goals, they got a numerical grade. But when we were doing a reassessment where they knew which particular learning goal they were going to be asked about, that we use levels instead. So the maximum that a student would be able to earn on a reassessment for a particular learning goal was a level 4, which we count as 85%. We found that took away the mark scrounging from some of these students. And we also say, okay, you're 85, that is a level 4 because you haven't been responsible for integrating concepts. We do reserve the right at, later on when this is revisited on a culminating task or on the final exam or in a later cycle, if they're able to show 100% that they know that in that additional scenario, then I don't have a problem with changing that to 100%, but that the reassessment opportunities, because it is a smaller snapshot, that wasn't a possibility. And that, I feel, for me, Trish, made that more manageable because students, it began to become more about showing their learning and not scrounging,
Yeah,
which,
exactly.
So when you do the reassessment, do you throw out the original assessment mark?
Yes, we do.
Yes,
We do.
absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Their grade in any learning goal needs to reflect their current knowledge of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And if we're going to grow, then we need to honor what they know now. And we often get questions from parents about that, actually. And there's two diverse trains of thinking about it. The ones that think this is fantastic that it truly honors growth. And then the other who feels like, well, my child got it first, therefore they should have a higher grade, and which is more like a punitive perspective. But I think probably something that for many of our parents and guardians was their experience in high school. So we understand where that's coming from. And lots of times we use I use the analogy about, students getting their driver's license. Let's say they don't get it the first time. They don't get it. They need to have some more driver training. They need to practice a lot more. When they go back for their driver's test again, they're not given a conditional license or told that their license is going to be different than the student who got it the first time. In fact, that student who actually had to do the more practice might actually be a better driver, because they've had more feedback, more practice. So that's one of the kind of things to navigate, I think, when you're doing this in your classroom, is that parent piece that we get asked about.
Don't you get flack if they score like 100% on the reassessment and you're only giving them 85?
Yep.
Yeah, we do.
We do get some questions about that, and that's where we're happy to we're happy to write, because we're not giving any mark, they're earning the mark. We're happy to record that as 100% once you've shown us that you're able to integrate those concepts with other concepts to select that particular concept as an appropriate tool to solve problems, because we not only have our curriculum, we have, because we're math teachers, the mathematical processes that are kind of the backdrop to everything that we're doing. So the reassessment is a great way for students to improve their learning, which is why we do it, but it's not the whole picture of what a mathematician does, when we're narrowing it so much.
Thank you.
No problem.
So the last thing here is, how do we determine their final grade? So it is based on the knowledge of the learning goals from the course. And we have decided that each learning, well, not decided, but each learning goal in our course is weighted equally, right? So their overall grade would combine the averages of their at this moment grades for each learning goal it would combine that with the conversations and observations that we made throughout the semester.
And that is something, like Trish said, like we decided, well, we just figured that made sense, but we do get some pushback sometimes from students, because let's say there was a big, long, more convoluted question, and that's one learning goal. And then there was another learning goal that was shorter and didn't require as much work. There's this idea that work handed in, it's like a transaction, therefore I give more marks, when really our document is our curriculum. And as long as we've hit those goals, then we feel like you're ready to move on. So, it's very interesting. And even some teachers, we've had lots of conversations about in terms of what's the right way to go. And I think what it comes back to is really, we don't believe in grades at all, like numerical grades, right? We're forced to put a grade on there. Even back when we were doing the knowledge understanding application, I mean, who on earth decided on those weightings? Those were pretty random weightings, right? And I know it wasn't even described by the curriculum in terms of what percentage of the grade had to be devoted to knowledge, etc. So it seemed to me that by us just making each learning goal worth the same amount, it's like I wasn't putting my personal preference into this. And that's really at all costs what I wanted to avoid, because I wanted the students to own their learning. If I start weighting one learning goal more than others, it's almost suggesting that I'm fixing the grades again, which is what some students kind of thought before we started this, that this was something I controlled. And so I just felt that this was more transparent. It was, and once it's shared at the beginning, it was equitable because there were no surprises.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to pop in a link to a Padlet. Trish has also put a QR code on the screen for those of you who would choose to access this Padlet in this way. And so basically, for those of you who don't feel comfortable kind of unmuting yourself and sharing, we're hoping that you would take this opportunity to share any challenges that you might foresee implementing and managing the practices that we're talking about today, or, really anything you want to share about this today, we'd be more than happy to see. So we'll just maybe give a few moments to see if we can populate that. By the way, the bottom right, you can see on Trisha's screen that she's sharing. You just need to click on that and it will give you the opportunity to write a little sticky note there in the Padlet and share your thoughts. Extra workload. That's definitely something we need to chat about. What does your admin think? Maybe we can get started and we can continue to watch this space. Shall we start with the extra workload, since that's the first one that came up? Okay, great questions, actually, as I'm looking at these, they're really, really great questions. The extra workload, yes. There is some extra workload related to this. But I really think that the first key part of this is, and I liked what Peter suggested earlier. So if I didn't have Trish to work with, I don't even know if I didn't want to give, some of more of my personal time to creating these learning goals. I think Peter's idea about pulling up the overall learning goals and co-creating the specific learning goals in class is an awesome way to get started with this. I think that massively would reduce the amount of workload that I would have to do before coming into the classroom. And it does really have that student voice connection to it. Okay, it really, really does. And I really like that it honors that and it allows the students to process that before that would happen. So I think that would help in terms of reducing some of the workload that's involved with that.
Another advantage, if I could just interrupt for a second, and I mentioned this briefly, it gives the students an overview of what's going on, right? And it gives you an opportunity to introduce the topic and do like a mini sort of 5-minute lesson, right?
Right.
And then they kind of know what's coming up.
Yeah.
Even though it's probably over their head, but at least, that's cool or whatever.
Yeah.
That's going to be really hard.
I think in terms of the tests, like we had our regular tests that we were using before we started this process, and that wasn't a big change. We didn't have any marks on them, so we were able to use the same style of test. The only change with that was adding one extra page that broke down the test into this question was this learning goal, and really it was taking the exact same evaluation, but breaking it up in a different way. The other thing, sorry.
Can I just add in there when
Yeah.
you said that in terms of a test, right? When prior to this and I was using Cutica, I would still record 4 grades for each test. So we're averaging, sometimes it's only 4 learning goals on an assessment. Sometimes it's more, right? So in that part, I think that it's very comparable to what we've been doing before. I think it's where the reassessments come in that maybe some people are questioning, okay, how do you manage that workload?
Right.
Sorry, Leanne.
No, for sure. With when I did one of my grade 12 courses and I was doing it on my own, because that wasn't one that Trish and I were sharing, for the extra work that the students did to have to prepare and prove to me that they had done some more moving toward mastery, I just basically saved the text. We don't use a textbook a lot, but I found a textbook that we could use. And I took the review for different units that were chunked still like that. And I just really used and said, these are the questions that you need to have done in order to be eligible to reassess, so that it was very easy for me. With our new course, we've, refined it and you make it better. And we don't use our textbook for that, but that was a real entry point for me. So instead of assigning review from the mid-chapter review or the final review, I kind of saved that, and I saved that for the reassessment opportunities. The other point, in terms of making up reassessments for that group as well, I had the students come and see me before school, and we had conversations about it. And I found that that was more manageable. I felt like it was a richer sort of reassessment. And that way I didn't need to make up all sorts of new tests and stuff like that. That wasn't just manageable for me. But I felt that Growing Success allowed me to do that. And I could say, okay, based on what you've told me, I think that you're at a level 4 or a level 3, or here's where you still need to grow. I understand that, that does require you to be familiar with the course and to have, it's easier when you're experienced in teaching the course, I think, to do that sort of conversation. I think that for some of our new teachers, because this kind of takes into some other conversations, having, a couple of questions held back that they might be able to ask the students to do, but doing that as a conversation, I think does eliminate or minimize some of the workload that would be inherent to that.
So the reassessment is not a class-wide reassessment.
No. And it's not like redoing the entire test, right? It's not everyone, it is totally ownership of learning, right? It's led by the student. We don't tell students to reassess, right? There are still students that, right, they decide, I'm happy with what I have right now, and they don't do any extra work and they continue through the course normally. But for those students that do want to be engaged in their learning and improve their learning, and they do the extra work, they will apply for a reassessment.
And in terms of what a conversation like that might look like, jumping off what Trish said, I might even just say to the students, okay, tell me what you learned from your assessment. What do you know now that you didn't know then? And how can you prove that to me? Because truly, if it is their learning, that is really putting the ball in their court, that they are taking ownership of that. And for me, that's easy. And when a student can answer those questions, then I can really feel pretty darn confident if we can have a conversation that they truly are a level 4 or level 3, or it allows me an opportunity to give them even more feedback for growth.
I think we talked about it in our first session about the journey that we went through, Leanne and I, and some other teachers in our board here, in terms of deprivatizing our classroom and really being collaborative with each other and team teaching. I think that extra workload, like Leanne mentioned, right? We work really closely together, and we share the workload. Like if I had to do it all on my own, there were things probably that I could not manage myself, right? And so the other question there, convincing other teachers that this is an okay way to assess and evaluate. We've had teachers in our department currently right now asking for next year, can so-and-so and I teach the same course together so that we can collaborate and try some of these assessment practices, right? So it really does encourage collaboration, which for me was transformational in my teaching career. Working with Leanne and just collaborating in almost everything we do, it is like, it's reinvigorating in terms of coming to work in the morning and teaching, and we try these activities and we share what worked and didn't work, and right. I think it's so highly impactful.
And at the beginning, Trish and I actually weren't at the same school. We were at different schools and we were working together on a particular program. We started working together and we actually both changed schools so that we could come to the same place. We were previously coaches at our schools, and then budget cuts and whatever happened. And we just realized we couldn't go back. We couldn't go back into a silo of our own classroom and still feel good about what we were doing and still manage it, really. And I didn't realize how isolating that classroom environment was until I experienced something else, until we deprivatized that classroom environment. And at the very beginning, I know in my previous school, it was as simple as saying, we had this program called Open Doors, Open Minds, where people from all different departments would put something up on the whiteboard in the staff room if they were trying something new. And it said, if you've got prep or whatever the case may be, come on in and see it. And it took a lot of courage at the beginning, but it was really, really changing, career changing, path changing for all of that. And that kind of almost brings us to admin, because I think that there was a learning curve for admin as well, that if we want this teacher learning to happen, that we need to privilege this learning. So we started as just a staff saying, we're willing to give up our prep because we really value the time we get to spend in another person's classroom. Because once you try it, it's hard to go back.
Yeah.
And so it was actually worth my prep to
Yeah.
do that, and to honor the fact that this other person is putting themselves out there. It didn't have to be like a marriage commitment where you're going to stay forever, right? You could pop in and pop out on a particular day. When admin saw this, we realized teachers are giving up their prep to learn. Maybe we need to look at ways to fund this and to allow release time so that teachers can actually get into other people's classrooms. Our admin then started joining us and coming into the classrooms more and seeing what was happening there. And really, that's the only way that admin can understand or experience what we were doing. So when you're making a change like this, I know at the beginning we went to admin, we started, I think Trish mentioned, trying to be gradeless. So that's definitely something that had to go to admin. It actually had to go to the superintendent. And we met with our superintendent of teaching and learning and explained what we wanted to do. And here's the research surrounding why we want to do it. And we needed to get the okay from them so that we could proceed with that. Because it is definitely something that's going to cause some ruffling of feathers, perhaps in a department and now in a school. Because once the kids understand that this is something, these are practices, teacher practices, actually prescribed by Growing Success or supported by Growing Success that are really helping them to learn. They don't want to go back to another way of being assessed, right, Trish? Like, I mean, that's the other side of this.
Yeah. And I don't feel like I've had to convince other teachers. I think that a lot of us have these same ideas. It's just helping each other manage it, right? And how do you even implement it? Like, people are wanting to try these things and are concerned about the extra workload. So how do we manage it, right? And that's where we really have a supportive department that people get together and say, yeah, I want to assess according to criteria. Right? I want the feedback that I give my students to be actionable so they can do something with it. The parents are understanding, so it's totally transparent, right? And let's work together to try and make that manageable for each other.
And I think that if you're not in a situation where you can work with someone, because that might be the case.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that if you're in that situation, I think what I would be doing in that situation is making a big key change, which is changing to learning goals, to actually making all of my assessments tied to the specific or overall expectations, learning goals, whatever you want to call them, so that any feedback is tied to that. So you need to talk to admin and let them know that that is the change you're going to make. When they ask about, well, what about the cuticle? What about the knowledge, understanding, thinking, and all of that? And the answer to that question is that those different categories are actually embedded in our curriculum. There are curriculum expectations that are really geared towards thinking. There are others that are based towards communication. So you are covering each of those categories in your learning goals if you're sticking true to the curriculum. So I think that would be the number one thing that I think is going to make a huge difference. I also think that instead of, trying to make up these reassessments and all of that kind of stuff, you could just have your conversations. I really don't think you're going to get pushback from students, because my experience has been when we have those conversations and the students have done work, the mark tends to go up. And if not, it becomes pretty obvious why it hasn't. So the parents and the students are not complaining about that. It's a really more holistic view of what's happening. And I think that just doing those two things, I think that's manageable as a place to start.
Yeah.
Anything else to add to that, or questions to add to that? So I guess, I mean, we had another Padlet set in terms of what we could do to support you going forward, but perhaps we can even just add it to here or add it to the chat.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, participants, that you think would be helpful to know, or that could happen going forward that we could help you on your journey?
Could you pop the link to the slideshow in the chat, please? So that way I'll know that I have it to share with the video.
Leanne, do you have, sorry,
In
the links from session 1 is the link to the Google Drive.
Okay, sounds good. Let me grab that and pull it up.
Unless I can.
No,
You guys are still seeing my screen, right? So
yeah, no, I'm going to go ahead and I'll find that. Sorry, guys, I had a new computer. My computer broke down.
Exactly. We
and
have computer issues.
Yes, so let me just find it here.
Did you buy a new one?
No, they re-imaged it actually.
Board one.
I'm looking for it here. And what happened is that I was not getting the updated Google Drive links. Trish and I actually share a Google Drive. We have like a separate one that's our shared drive, and I'm not.
Don't worry about it now. We'll
okay.
just take care of it.
Okay. Oh, I think okay, sounds good. We definitely have it.
Yeah, I can. If I can stop sharing my screen, I can.
Okay, why don't you do that? I apologize, guys.
Sorry.
We are still working through my computer problems.
I will do that. I'm just Google Drive. Yeah, I think though, we just wanted to wrap up by asking if there was any way we could support you in your journey in terms of maybe trying a couple of things. I'm still looking for the link. So.
No problem.
Well, I'll make sure that your contact information is included in the show notes. So that way, if anybody wants to follow up, they'll have your email addresses.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. We appreciate that. I'm sorry, Trish, that that's not showing up for me. You know what? So I also lost Keynote on my machine. And we've been having trouble really all month, to be honest with you. It's recently gotten fixed. And now that was my one job. Trish has been working the Keynote and I can't even get it.
Okay, so you know what? I think we're going to have to send that to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I send that to you later, Peter?
Sure, no worries. No worries.
Okay. Well, we're
I'm
really
at a loss right now.
That's okay. I think that this has been a great experience for us. We really appreciate the time that everyone has taken. We know as teachers ourselves how busy this time of year is, and we really hope that you were able to take something away from it. We're thankful for Peter for going to share our contact information. Because we're always looking to learn, and we always find that the more we share, the more we learn, and things are constantly evolving.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So what I'll do, I think I still have it on my clipboard. Yep. I'm just going to pop the feedback form in before people start leaving. And then shall I share again, or do you have any
Sure.
things you'd like to
Yeah.
do? Okay. Okay, back to PowerPoint. Okay, so first of all, thank you. I know it wasn't a big crowd tonight, but I really appreciate everybody that's come out. And thank you so much, obviously, to Leanne and Trish. This has been very interesting. Assessment and evaluation has come a long way, you know, since the achievement chart came out. Like I remember when it first came out. Actually, when I went to the ministry, I went to the A&E folks and I went to them and I said, "Can you tell me about the achievement chart? Like, I don't fully understand it, you know." And I'll never forget the reaction. So one of the education officers he put his hand on his forehead and he shook his head. And he said, "We do not know how the school boards took it in the directions they're taking it. You know, it was totally misinterpreted." And the one you made a comment about, you know, with the 4 categories, what should they all be worth? You know, and teachers wanted more direction, right? And I recall going to a meeting with the subject associations, and there was an A&E education officer there, and they were really pressing her hard for, you know, like what's the breakdown? Like, should they all be 25% or right? And you know, and she was a perfect politician. She didn't want to answer directly, right? And then they finally kind of forced her to say, you know what, if any of the 4 categories are less than 10%, you're not honoring that category, right? And which was kind of interesting as well. But many people, I mean, you probably know it from your own history. Many people took it to the point where even a test, they would hand out a test, and the test would have all 4 categories of the achievement chart on it, which was not the intent ever, right? So it's so nice to see that you guys fully understand that the categories are often embedded in the learning and embedded in, you know, like realistic, contextualized often achievements, or not achievements, but assessments, right? So yeah, it's come a long way. It's wonderful. Anyway, okay, what else do I have? I've already submitted that. Okay, the next webinar is Tuesday, re-energizing the junior classroom, with Cam Steltman and Richard Parker. I know Cameron really well from the Curriculum Forum, which would be pretty interesting. Although we don't know how many junior educators we have here, do we? Yeah. So I think that wraps it up for me.